When I started practicing law years ago, I noticed very quickly that the cards were stacked against innocent accident victims. That's not right. That's why my law firm is dedicated to working exclusively on behalf of those who need it the most. I'm Brian Goldfinger of Goldfinger Personal Injury Law. When you're in an accident, we can help you get the compensation you deserve. Visit goldfingerlaw.com and get us working for you.
Get Goldfinger today.
Welcome to Raptors Weekly for the week of December the 7th. Tim Chisholm joins the podcast today. Hey, Tim.
How you doing?
Not bad. It's a solo thing today with just you and me, man. No Andrew, no Will. We got to talk some serious basketball. We can't be reactionary. Whenever you're on the podcast, expectations are high. So are you ready to deliver?
I'm always ready to deliver.
Okay. All right. Good. So let's start with Golden State.
Yes.
The Raptors lost by what? What was it in the end? 109, 112. The general feeling after that game across the Republic is that moral victory. We stayed close with a team that's 21-0, and sometimes you win some, you lose some, and let's take away the good, and that's just how it is. Are you of that view? Like, are you of the view that there's a moral victory here because we stayed close with the current champs and a team that's undefeated? Or are you of the view that we were tied with a minute left and we managed a way to blow this one, and I'm kind of upset? Where are you in that balance?
Oh, I'm totally in the latter camp. I mean, it's funny with the Raptors because they've been so bad for so long, and the fan base has really trained themselves to accept a certain level of mediocrity, if that makes sense, that you can start to really build out the moral victories that I don't really think need to exist anymore. I mean, they missed crucial free throws down the stretch. Cory Joseph had a blunderhead turnover. I mean, it happens, and it's not as though it's a world-ending thing, but I don't think there's much of a moral victory to come out of another loss.
Yeah, to me, it's more like we couldn't execute late in games again and cost us a win more than we stuck close. Because, I mean, credit to the Raptors, they stayed with the Warriors, and that's something to be said for that. But when it's a tight game, you expect the home team to pull that off. Especially when Kyle Lowry's having the game he's having. He's basically playing Steph Curry to he's canceling him out pretty much. And once you do that, like, the rest of your guys have to step up and kind of deliver. And it didn't happen. Your thoughts on the game, like your thoughts on DeRozan, who's getting a lot of attention in this game. He was 5 for 19 for 16 points. Missed a big free throw. Kyle Lowry also missed a big free throw down the stretch. What did you make of his approach to the game compared to something like a game like Phoenix, which he played a week ago, where he was, like, to me, he had his best game of the year, where he was the ultimate point forward, delivering assists, scoring efficiently, versus what you saw today? Was it like the same approach, but things just didn't turn out this way, or was it anything particular that he was doing differently yesterday?
Well, he plays the kind of game where there isn't a lot of built-in consistency to it. He's the kind of guy, he takes difficult shots, and some games he makes them, some games he doesn't. And it's really important for me when I talk about DeRozan to say that I don't think in any way that he's a selfish player. I don't think that that's the way that he's wired. But I think that he's wired in a way where he thinks the best way that he can help his team is to do the things that he feels he does best, which is to isolate. And you see there were so many instances in the last game where the ball would swing on a prearranged play. He'd get it at the top of the circle, and then he takes that 1.5 beat hesitation to assess the situation. And when you're playing against a team like Golden State, that's all they're going to need to recalibrate their defense, lock into you, and shut you down. And he's getting to that point now where too many teams know what they have to do to stop him. And sometimes the refs are going to be generous, sometimes they're not. And that's starting to become the differentiator on his good games and bad games. And look, his passing out of those trouble spots is impressive, but it's still only going to get you 4 or 5 assists a game. I mean, it's not going to be the difference. And especially if you're a guy who is supposed to be the second best player on the team, it's not enough. Because like you said, Lowry had an outstanding game, basically cancels out Steph Curry. And so that's the kind of game where DeRozan has to be the next man up and put on those sort of finishing touches. And he didn't. That's what Klay Thompson did for Golden State.
Yeah. And the one side effect of when DeRozan does tend to isolate, and I totally agree with you, he's not a selfish player. I think what he's doing, he generally feels is the best for the team, and it's more instruction than anything. I don't think I think if a different coach asked him to play a different way, he'd be totally open to that because that's the type of personality, that's the type of sponge mentality he has when it comes to learning basketball. So I'm not hating on DeRozan here at all. I'm just questioning the approach he has to games. But one side effect of that ISO play is that the other team is always in excellent defensive rebounding position whenever you're going ISO. And a team like Golden State that's always gang rebounding, you don't have a chance of getting a lot of offensive rebounds and putbacks. That's one area of the game which just isolation just takes away.
Yeah, no, it completely does. It just puts the team in a bad spot. And because part of what happens with rebounding is understanding for offensive rebounding, understanding when your teammate is going to take a shot. And when you're isolating, it's a lot harder to gauge at what point you're going to decide that it's a worthwhile time to take your shot. And so you're kind of trying to gauge, is he going to catch it and shoot it right away? Is he going to drive and shoot it? Is he going to drive, post up and shoot it? Drive, post up, turn around and shoot? I mean, it's a constant guessing game. And when you're already having to keep a certain amount of passing lanes open just to make sure that you're available for for an escape pass if he needs one, it really compromises the team's ability to play in that sort of interconnected five-man offensive unit that would end potentially in an offensive rebound.
The other notable for me yesterday was obviously Kyle Lowry, who was just phenomenal, and we'll talk about him just briefly. But Luis Scola, who I thought really shouldn't have been in the game. I really felt that he was a player. This wasn't the game for him. Whenever you have a guy like Ezeli or Green checking you or you're checking them, Scola is not the type of guy that's going to defend or have success offensively there. Just because those guys are extremely aggressive, they're wiry, they cover a lot of ground, they don't give you space to shoot, they crowd you, and also they're very active on the defensive glass. To me, this was a game which was designed for someone like a smaller guy like James Johnson, who got in for 5 minutes. But to me, like the late game thing that Casey's doing these days is that the offense-defense with either Bebe or Scola or Biyombo or Scola or something like that. But to me, this was a game where you got to go small and match Golden State so you can actually maybe keep Ezeli off the glass or keep check Green just a little bit, because he had some straight line drives that really killed the Raptors.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough because I think that Scola to start the season, and he was great to start the season, but he had one of those starts where it caught a lot of teams off guard how heavily Toronto would lean on him. And as the season has gone on, we're into the second month of the season, teams are starting to catch on to what it is that they want to do with a guy like Scola, and they're starting to cut off those options. And Casey is still at a point where, because Scola is a smart veteran player, and he is, there's that instinct to kind of want to go back to him. There's that instinct to want to milk the sort of stuff that he was doing at the start of the year. But, I mean, he was 2 of 9 last night, and you know he's not going to be able to guard the guys on the other end of the floor. And so I don't exactly know what you're hoping to get out of him in that situation. He ends the game with 5 fouls. It's not a perfect situation. And part of it is roster construction, because, you know, you definitely could throw someone like James Johnson in, but you would love to have a better option or a better series of options at power forward than what he's got. But even then, still, if you want to stay big, I mean, then stretch Patterson out a bit.
Yeah.
You know, by the end of that game, there's enough timeouts, there's enough breaks in play. I'm with you. It's just Scola down in that situation. It's non-ideal, and I don't think that you're putting Scola in the best position to succeed when you're throwing him into those situations against a team like Golden State. And ultimately, you know what? You're right about the Johnson thing, because I guess at the end of the day, if you have a guy like that, what else is he there to do?
Yeah.
Except in those matchups.
Yeah. But sticking with the power forward spot, there were some positive signs over the week that Patrick Patterson is returning to not productivity levels, but contribution levels. Let's say he's contributing to the team at this point. His shooting is still a little off. He tends to miss a lot of threes for the first 3 quarters and then bangs in a couple in the fourth. But against Golden State, against Atlanta, and against even Denver, I think we saw Patrick Patterson that's certainly more engaged defensively, and maybe that offensive confidence is returning just a little bit. Have you noticed a positive trend in his game?
I've definitely noticed that he's finding other ways to contribute. I mean, he had 10 rebounds last night, and that's not something that Patterson really does. But he's a guy that's smart enough to know, well, my shot's not going down. I got to find other ways to contribute. He's getting mobile on defense, which is really helping. And I think the thing that I like about him is, right, the way the trend is going is he doesn't look scared anymore. I have no idea why for the back half of last year and the start of this season, he had an inherent panic in his game that is finally starting to ebb. It's finally starting to massage its way out of his game. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at a guy like Patterson, what you need him to do is hit threes.
Yeah.
You know, if what you're ultimately looking for is a guy who's going to get you rebounds or a guy who's going to play mobile defense, you sort of want to go out into the trade market and find someone for whom those are their specialties. But they stick with a guy like Patterson because he's supposed to stretch the floor. And he's gun shy enough on those threes that it's not even having the effect of pulling defenders out of the paint just in case. You know, he's people know he's not going to shoot them now if there's even a modicum of a challenge. And so I'm glad that he's finding a bit more footing. But at the end of the day, I don't know that it's finding the footing that the Raptors actually need in order for him to balance out the way the roster is constructed.
Like, he's one of those players that the Raptors, if they want to achieve their full potential this year and maybe go to the second round or maybe even the third, he's one of those guys that you have to play hoping he finds his game. There are certain like constraining factors the Raptors have to consider. Like DeMar DeRozan's offense is one of the DeMar DeRozan's efficient offense is one of those things. Patrick Patterson's 3-point shooting, Terrence Ross's defense. These are three things that I look at and go, if the Raptors just had those in consistency, they got that night in and night out, this would in the East easily be a 50-win team. But because of those three things, because they're so inconsistent, that's basically essentially the lever between a 52-win team and a 44-win team.
No, I know it's 100% true. And it's the kind of thing that you get to once you start accepting the fact that a certain amount of basketball, a certain amount of professional sports just comes down to whether or not a guy has it. You know, and I mean, on paper, this team is constructed in such a way that it makes a lot of sense. But if you've watched enough of guys like Patterson and Ross and DeRozan, you know that these are built-in inconsistencies in the game. You know that these are guys that at their best can do it, but on a night-to-night basis might not. It's one of the things that kind of bugs me a little bit about the night-to-night commentary during the games. And I'm not one to get too hung up on the play-by-play or anything, but it's that notion of these are shots these guys normally hit. Matt Devlin loves throwing that out. And it only bothers me because they're not. They're shots that these guys can hit and sometimes hit, but it's not shot that these guys normally hit, because if these were shots these guys normally hit, you wouldn't keep running into these problems and you wouldn't have to keep trotting out that line. It's 100% true that if you want to be the kind of team that starts cracking 50 wins, you have to have all of these on paper designs actually executable in games. And it's one of the big things haunting this team. And you kind of knew it going into the season. These were built-in inconsistencies. And even if any one of them were able to push through them for stretches of the season, history tells you that eventually they will fall off again. Yeah. And it's the roll of the dice that Ujiri made. And I at this point do not believe that this will be the team that ends the season. But right now that's what they're sticking with. And you're getting these really lopsided results because of it.
Yeah, at the very least, I agree that this is not the team that's going to end the season, because like we have a couple of roster spots right now that are not doing anything. Like James Johnson, for example. Like if we're not going to play him, ship him and get somebody else who can help. Like if he's not your guy, let's move him and get somebody else in. Like why do we have this spot on the roster which is just going to waste because we're not utilizing him? The coach obviously doesn't favor him as a player or thinks him to be a very situational player, and what those situations are, I still can't really put my finger on it. So it's James Johnson is a guy I tweeted on my lowly corner sniper account, is that if I had to put money on somebody getting shipped by the deadline, it's not Ross, it's not DeRozan, even though he's out of contract, it's James Johnson.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. And it especially makes sense when you're dealing with a GM like Ujiri, who wants to use so much of the back fifth of the roster, not fifth, back last five players at the end of the roster on such young projects. It doesn't leave the team a lot of options when you do need to throw somebody else into the game or an injury does hit. And so the importance of a spot like the 10th man on your roster, like someone like James Johnson, becomes vitally important. And if the coach doesn't trust that player, regardless of how good or bad the player is, if the coach doesn't trust them and that's your coach, you've got to make something more of that spot because you do not have the depth from 11 to 15 to absorb having a player on the team that is basically a gamble on the part of the coach and a guy that he's not going to throw. I mean, last night's a perfect example that he's not going to feel comfortable throwing out there and trusting him. And that kind of trust, I mean, it affects how a player plays. If a player knows that the coach doesn't fundamentally trust them, they are going to be very wary of when they make a mistake, looking over their shoulder. And nobody's going to play well in that situation, or nobody's going to play consistently well in that situation, because if you're playing too afraid to make mistakes, that's going to be the dominant play in your head. And you can see it with Johnson when he's out there. And I don't think that we're even getting the best of James Johnson when he's out there because of that.
Yeah. So sticking with the front court here, Lucas Nogueira has come out of the blue, basically out of the D League, and given us some really good minutes this week against Atlanta. In his return to Atlanta, he had a very strong game. Was a key factor with Kyle Lowry on the pick and roll. And then against Golden State, he had a few hoops. And I think one thing that surprised me, I always knew that he was a good passer, that he was a good catcher of the ball, but how well he's setting his screens is something that's really caught me by surprise.
I'm totally with you. It was in his second game, getting real minutes. It was the thing that I couldn't get over is how well he was setting screens, how well he was freeing up his teammates, how quick his dives were to the basket. It's a really, really impactful part of what he brings to the team. And I tweeted this last night, but if I'm Biyombo, I'm genuinely afraid for my minutes because obviously he's not as well-rounded a defensive player as Biyombo, but he can also afford to not be because he's taller, longer, and what he gives them on the offensive end helps balance it out. I mean, part of the reason why the team is getting off to such bad starts since Valanciunas went down, not just losing Valanciunas as an offensive option, but again, you're being guarded like you only have 4 offensive players on the floor. And so you can have this guy roaming around because not only is Biyombo not a guy who can put points up, he's not a guy who can catch the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to significantly affect your offense. And Bebe being able to do the kinds of things that he's doing, even in the simple 2-man pick and rolls with Lowry where he's getting these alley-oops, it's just another element that an offense that is really struggling for points on a consistent basis needs. And so and you know what, going back to the last point, it's a credit then to Casey that he was comfortable enough to go deep into his rotation in that Atlanta game and pull Bebe off the bench and put him into the game. Because again, you need to make use of some of those other players when things aren't going well, and credit to Bebe for actually making something enough of it that he's now like a real big minute player. He had, he had 24 minutes last night to Bismack Biyombo's 14. I mean, that's a real trust factor.
Yeah, and he seems to understand his role. So I'll play you a clip from his post-game interview from last night.
Not just Kyle, but Cory Joseph and other players, they high level. When you play with guys that level, they're going to throw you a lob if you make a good screen. And if they don't throw, they're going to find some guy open. So my job is just to make a good screen because I know how level they play, and they're going to find me for sure. Sometimes, like DeMar, no lobs, but just passing me and a catch and dunk. So I just need to make good screens and roll hard. And if I'm not open, my teammate is going to be open for the easy shots.
So this guy gets it. Like his role is pretty much well defined on the team, and credit to Casey for that. Like he gets that he's there to set screens and roll to the rim. That's something you can't do with Biyombo, obviously, but with Bebe, it's opened up a whole new set of plays almost with the Raptors just because we have a guy who can actually willingly roll to the rim. Valanciunas, even though he's capable of doing that, I don't see him being used in similar situations. He's more of a dump the ball on the left elbow or on the baseline, see what he's got. There's some two-man game, but with Bebe, it's 100% two-man game every time he's on the floor.
Yeah, and it's completely changed the way that the team runs offense when he's on the floor. He's the guy coming out and setting every single screen, which means he's basically involved in almost every offensive possession when he's on the floor. And this is for a guy who's basically getting his first NBA minutes. You've been hearing from the team since last year that he's a guy that they like and actually trust and has to get healthy so that he can get minutes on the floor. And you're seeing why the team has faith in him, not just enough to give him minutes, but enough to put him in a position to have a genuine impact in games. I mean, if it's a kind of amazing to me, even the amount of screens that he's put in. I don't think he's picked up a single illegal screen yet.
Yeah, good point. And Biyombo had like 4 in one game against Denver, I think it was.
Yeah, he's got a very, very strong appreciation for the flow of the game, for the flow of the pace, for where he needs to be. And yeah, partly by keeping it simple, but if everybody could do it, then it wouldn't matter that Bebe could do it. So it's a very impressive start, I think, and I'm very curious to see what happens in the weeks to come as teams scout him more.
Yeah. Sorry, Biyombo picked up those 4 screens against, I think, Phoenix, not Denver. So minor correction. Editorial consistency is a big thing here. Let's talk about Kyle Lowry, man. Obviously, a massive, massive game against Steph Curry. You think he was a little tired of Steph Curry, and said, you know what, I'm a pretty good player in my own right, and I can deliver while playing a team game for the full 48. So what impressed me about his game yesterday was that it wasn't just me ball. It wasn't him going ISO. It was him taking his opportunities, but doing it within a team context. We talked about his interplay with Bebe, the same with Patterson. I think he was well. Overall, his approach was complete to the game. There was no area which was really lacking, other than that missed free throw.
Yes, other than the missed free throw. But no, I agree. And it's a very, very marked difference, I think, between the way that Kyle Lowry tried to take over games last year versus how he's doing it this year. And it's exactly to your point, is he really, really does take what the defense gives him. And part of that is forcing himself against the defense and forcing them to react. But it's amazing how few shots he forces. I mean, he took 26 shots last night. And I think there might have been 2 that you could look at and say, all right, that was probably a bit over aggressive, but you're trying to go for a foul, you're trying to shift the defense and there's no pass for you, whatever. But he's a guy that has got such a developed sense of where the best place is to get his points from, and doesn't try to put himself in an offensive position where he has to shoot from places that aren't conducive to his game, but also B, putting himself in a position to control the flow of the defense to either get him his shots or get his teammate shots off of his offensive execution. And it's such an impressive, mature development in the way in which he now runs a team versus just playing point guard for a team, but understands where he needs to be in order for this team to succeed. And it blows my mind the level to which he's gotten himself, considering that at best when you sort of got him, you were hoping you were getting a sort of like second tier of the top tier type of point guard. I mean, he's a genuinely elite player.
Yeah, he's shooting 42% from 3 this season, and which is that's a big sample size too, like 151 threes. That's something that's career high for him.
And it's saving the team, because when you have guys like Ross and Patterson who aren't hitting their threes consistently, you need somebody out there who's going to be able to space the floor like that and get you those extra points.
And he's the guy who's been rescuing the Raptors time and time again this season by having those 3 to 4 minutes of just Superman burst speed, where he kind of kills a 10-point deficit all by himself, or surges the team ahead just by using his individual play, just based on his sheer ability, and just almost going like, I've had enough of this game. I got to take over. We can't be playing this bad. Atlanta was a perfect example where the team was really in a rut, and in that third quarter he decided, okay, enough is enough, and I got to take over. And then he started his surge in the late third quarter. There he had 31 points in that game, 9 for 17 shooting, 11 for 12 from the free throw line. Like, is he the rescue man for the Raptors when things are going well? Are you comfortable with that being the lever the Raptors pull when they're down in a hole?
I am, because he knows how to do it. It's one of those things where there are a lot of players in the NBA that think, okay, when things are going poorly, I'm going to take over. I'm going to put the team on my back. And you saw it a lot 2 years ago with Rudy Gay. And it's that internal pressure that they feel to take over the game. But not that many players understand how to do that in a way that's going to be effective. Yeah. And the thing and that even speaks to Lowry in the past. I mean, a guy that had the impulse to take over a game, but would barrel into the lane, which teams could easily see, pick up charges, or miss layups, not get fouled. I mean, he's learned from those experiences to see what are the ways in which I can actually come in, impact a game, change the flow of a game, bring the team back. And it's the kind of thing that I think was supposed to be DeRozan's role at one point, but Lowry has just developed a more acute sense for how to impact the game in a way that best benefits not just that individual moment, but actually helps to swing the momentum. It's those weird intangible things where it's not just the team standing back and watching him go off. It's making sure that, like, it impressed me in the Atlanta game where he'd had that insane outburst, and then at around the 4-minute mark or so, he started letting Cory Joseph take the ball.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sense of, I'm just going to do this for the rest of the game. It's making sure that if other people don't get the ball, if other people don't do it, then they're going to start quadruple teaming me because no one else is going to be in a rhythm. He understands that there needs to be a team-wide flow to it, even if he's the one instigating that flow. And I think that's the most impressive part of these late-game heroics.
What's your view on the lineup you just alluded to, with Cory Joseph playing the 1, Kyle Lowry at the 2, and DeMar DeRozan at the 3? It's a smaller lineup. To me, it's been fairly effective. Essentially, what that lineup says to me is that you can't play Terrence Ross. Because if you have those 3 and Terrence Ross, you're not getting... Terrence Ross can't rebound or play defense, so it totally makes him he's unplayable in that lineup.
Yeah, that's fine.
but overall thoughts on the lineup?
No, I like it. I think it's a good use of their assets. I think that Casey's obviously shown many times in the past that the 2 point guard lineups work for him. They kind of fell apart a bit last year with Lowry and Vasquez, but I always prefer situations where you have as many passers on the floor as you can put on the floor, because I think, especially in today's NBA, you need the ball to move in order to shift defenses, in order to create holes for yourself to create. And it's also nice that you're not looking at the 2 point guard lineup as one offensive guy, one defensive guy, because Joseph is an incredible defensive player, and Lowry has settled down a lot at that end of the floor and is really buying into the schemes and is really playing within himself. And it's impressive, especially because he's still racking up the steals doing it, but he's just gotten smarter about playing that way. And DeRozan, has the size to play the 3, and it can be somewhat matchup dependent, but I like it because it also means that generally, at least less than has been in the past, you aren't running down the stretch as many ISOs for DeRozan. They're actually getting a handful of them going to Joseph, who in an isolation situation is, at this point this season, better than DeRozan.
How do you explain having a 3-guard lineup, but the Raptors being essentially 29th in the league in assist rate? Like, you got 3 passers apparently on the floor, but still your assist rate is extremely low. It's poor, actually. Well,
I think that the ability to pass, I think in the case of that lineup, isn't so much about passing into shot opportunities so much as passing out of trouble. Mm-hmm. I think DeRozan especially, and I do consider this a skill that he has at this point, because he has had the tendency to dribble himself into a lot of trouble in the past. But his passes are almost entirely, okay, my individual sequence is now maxed out, I've triple teamed, and he can find an open man to initiate a new offensive sequence. But at the end of the day, Joseph, Lowry, and DeRozan, as offensive players, are all isolation players. So what it comes down to is one will try to make a move, get stopped, find someone else, they'll initiate their individual move. And the only kinds of assist positions you ever really get in are on the pick and rolls that you're seeing with Bebe lately. Otherwise, it's just a lot of isolation, just with 2 guys right now in Joseph and Lowry who are making something of those opportunities.
So Kyle Lowry is 29 years old. DeMar DeRozan is 26. I think about 2 years ago they were seen as equals in talent. Maybe they both were kind of at the same level in the league. But over the last couple of years, there seems to be a pretty big gulf developing between Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. Where if you ask a Raptor fan, if you ask Masai Ujiri today, who's the leader of this team, it's Kyle Lowry, and DeMar DeRozan is essentially I don't want to say a distant second, but a clear second.
I would almost say distant second, and it has almost more to do with how good Lowry's become. But it's actually somewhat astounding when you consider how long they were sort of a 1A and 1B situation in Toronto, that DeRozan really is now a clear B, and is almost closer to the pack, closer to Valanciunas and Joseph and those guys than he is to Lowry. And I think that's the part of it that really surprises me. And, talking about last night and the fact that he couldn't be that second guy to help Lowry once he was sort of matching Steph Curry. It's a style of game that DeRozan plays that other teams have just caught on to. They know now that if you throw a double team at DeRozan, his first instinct is not to pass. It's to try to break the double team. And so you're going to have time to recover when he finally does pass. You know how to force him to spots on the floor where he's inefficient, but he'll still take the shot. And without the ability to stretch his game to the 3-point line, and without the first step you need to be able to get to the rim at will, I think that the upper ceiling of his game is starting to get hit. And once you do that, other teams can really dig in on their scouting. And that's sort of what's happening with DeRozan. And I think that there's things you can definitely pin on him in terms of shot selection, in terms of some of his slow-footed defense, which is not bad. It's just sometimes, he's not making a name for himself on that end of the floor. But on the whole, I think what you're really reaching is just, this is a guy who's a fairly finished product in the NBA. And that finished product, as happens all the time in the league, is probably a notch below where he and the team and some fans thought he was going to be. And Lowry just demonstrated that he had a higher ceiling, and the best hope that you have for DeRozan is we're wrong. But I just, the way in which he's...
Let me counter that for a second.
Sure, yes. Yes.
Right now, DeRozan, the ceiling talk. Lowry 3 years ago was essentially a written-off person in the league. Mm-hmm. Houston had written him off, and at that time he was 26 years of age, which is DeRozan today. Mm-hmm. And we found that he hit his peak between really 27 and 29. Mm-hmm. Do you see DeMar DeRozan potentially having a similar career path where he reaches that next level later in his career?
I won't say he won't, because he's already better than I thought he was going to be 4 years ago. But the thing about Lowry, and the big difference, I think, is that what ended up happening with Lowry on the whole was he got better at the things that he was already good at, if that makes sense. He became a better 3-point shooter. He became better at finding seams to the rim. He became better at finishing around the rim. Became a more disciplined defender. When he already had the skills for it, he just gambled too much. DeRozan is elite at getting to the free throw line. I don't know if a player can get much better at it than he is without being James Harden, who's one of the best ever. But beyond that, I don't know what existing skills he has that he can definitely improve upon that will make him significantly better. For me, DeRozan, in order to take another step, needs new skills. Yeah. And that's the only hesitation that I have. Could he learn those new skills? Absolutely. And this is not a guy who shies away from working. But it's just that idea of all you've really seen in the last handful of years with DeRozan is an improvement of his existing skills to the point where he's gotten them about as solid as you could want them. He's a terrific finisher around the basket. He just doesn't have the ability to get there in a way that a James Harden would. Again, elite at getting to the free throw line, has become pretty strong at passing out of traffic, but he's still not, say, then like a playmaker. He's not a guy who's actually creating the offense for other players of the team, and it's still with the 3-point shooting and still with all that stuff.
Yeah, fair point. I see where you're going with this. It's like that Lowry essentially didn't learn any new skills at that age. He just got better at what he was doing. But DeMar DeRozan has clear holes in his game, and 3-point shooting and defense is probably the two big ones. So I get the counter. But the counter to the counter is that this is a really, really hard-working player who I really think is missing instruction and coaching more than work ethic or desire. And anytime you have a guy who's willing to work as hard as DeMar DeRozan does, I think you got to pepper that with some proper instruction, and you'll see the flower blossom or what have you.
It's possible, but the thing is that in terms of developing his skills, the head coach has almost no role in that. It's almost in completely assistant coaches. And he's had about 80 assistant coaches since he's been in Toronto. And I remember talking with Jay Triano about this when he was the head coach. And one of his biggest laments about being the head coach was that you don't get to coach. You have so many other responsibilities that you need a great staff in order to put these guys through the paces that they need and the reps that they need. And I think that Casey could do a better job of holding DeRozan accountable for some of the shot selection that he throws up, because that's something that isn't his control. But in terms of developing skills and developing areas of his game that are a weakness, I think that DeRozan has been exposed to about as much instruction on that end as he could hope for. Mm-hmm. And I definitely won't say that it won't happen. It's getting to that point where it's like, you kind of want to see, okay, well, what is going to be that other area that he's going to be able to address? I think even the last time we chatted, that was my thing with him. If he could just find one of those areas and make progress in it, I'm fine with the max deal.
Yeah.
But it just needs that one other area.
Let's switch back, because we didn't talk about this game at all. The Denver game that happened, hugely disappointing home loss to the Nuggets, who had lost 8 straight at the time. It was a 1-point defeat. Lowry hit a 3 at the fourth quarter buzzer, basically to go from 4-1. How do you explain this game? You just beat Atlanta, and you played Golden State competitively, but then you have this stinker of a game at home. Kind of, Ross was 1 for 9. He got a lot of the hate and the vitriol, which he usually does, and the new headband didn't help. At that point, you want to take attention away from yourself, not invite new contact. How do you explain this?
I think it's a lot of things. You can never discount a back-to-back after you've traveled.
I think Denver was a back-to-back too, I think, on that one.
That's true. And it's I think a bit of the high coming off of beating a team like Atlanta, looking ahead a little bit to a team like Golden State. It had trap game written all over it. I think that Denver was shooting out of their minds, and some of that was the defense, because I couldn't believe how many open shots some of them were getting. But I think that at the same time, it exposed a certain level of how do I put it? It's the incompleteness that I still see on this roster, I guess, is the Raptors have basically one or two styles that they can play as constructed. And when one of those styles or both of those styles aren't functioning, you really have no other punch to throw at another team. And when a team like Denver is hitting everything that they're throwing up, and are able to snuff out, at the very least, your first options, it bamboozled them. And I don't know that this is a team yet. And I mean, there are individuals, and a guy like Lowry we've talked about, there's individuals who get how to push through some of that. But as a team, be it because of familiarity, be it because of roster makeup, I just don't think they have the wherewithal to figure out how to push through a situation where they're struggling. And I mean, yes, they come back, but we're talking about not getting down 1 million points to begin with.
Yeah, and to me, like, it was something a little more specific for me. It was Daryl Arthur. Again, Louis Scola being the culprit here. Mm-hmm. Not to pick on the guy, because I think the guy, he's a role player. I think when we signed him, he was supposed to be a guy off the bench who would give you 15 minutes and be a good locker room presence and so on and so forth. He's kind of been thrust into a starting role, and he's essentially guarding guys who he's not really supposed to be guarding. And Daryl Arthur in that game, who's more nimble, who's more active, who's more athletic, kind of took him outside and drained like a bunch of jumpers on him. And by the time he was done with him, the Raptors were like down 15.
Yeah.
And it's the small things that it's like, I don't think the Raptors are necessarily playing bad for 48 minutes and losing, but they're having stretches, whether it be in the first quarter or third quarter, where it's like a 3 to 4 minute stretch where they just go completely in the tank and allow the other team to get all this momentum and confidence, and the other team tends to carry that through. And it comes down to individual matchups. Like, again, in this game, it's really weird. James Johnson, 4 minutes. Why is he play? What kind of who plays 4 minutes a game? Either you don't play at all, or you play like 15, 16, you're part of the rotation. But against Golden State, 5 minutes, Denver, 4 minutes. I don't get it. I just don't.
Well, I mean, he did throw James Johnson into the Denver game, and he did make some blunderheaded defensive plays. It's a case of, I think, the team really just having a poor reactionary sense to those exact. I mean, I totally agree with you about the stretches and versus the whole game. But it's this inability to understand within those stretches, save for a timeout. Okay, can we calm ourselves down on the court? Can we assess in the moment what our problem is? Can we assess where the damage is coming from and make those adjustments? And I think the thing that's interesting with a guy like James Johnson, and I think the reason why Casey can really lose faith in him is because he's a guy who almost has that sense where other players will have it on the offensive end. If I'm going to take this game over, he gets a bit of that on the defensive end. He gets a bit of that where because he is so quick, because he is so strong, because he has the shot blocking on the perimeter ability, he gets a little bit of that. I want to get my hands in everything, and it plays against the needs of the team's defensive structure. And sometimes it really works because he's that talented and that gifted on the defensive end. But other times, like it happened in the Denver game, is he's reaching on players he shouldn't be reaching on. He's collapsing when he shouldn't, so he's leaving guys open. He's got he can recover ish, but when you start breaking the team's defensive momentum, you start breaking down the chain. And when you start breaking down the chain, other teams can start to exploit it to get those open shots. And it's only frustrating to me because I see how good he can be. I mean, everybody can see how good he can be.
Yeah, it's more. It's not even. I'm not even asking you to defend or pick apart James Johnson. I just find that currently in the NBA we're in the the zeitgeist, I guess, of the smaller lineups, and then we have James Johnson here who's just sitting there on his desk with no work. I don't know. I feel there's a disconnect there.
And I agree. I mean, I would like to see him play more because I think that when you start talking about guys, and you brought it up with Scola. Every guy is going to have his limitations in certain matchups, and so James Johnson does too. You still should play him because sometimes his strengths will outweigh his limitations in a particular situation. But it's when go.
Well, speaking of, I think we covered James Johnson enough. I think the guy's been
well covered.
So speaking of playing more or playing at all, the next guy who's going to see playing time, will it be Anthony Bennett or Norman Powell?
Oh, I think it'll be Powell easily.
Yeah.
I mean, only because, again, he's got a definable NBA skill today, which is his defense. Bennett is one of those guys that is sort of not bad in a few areas, but
really, which area is that?
Athleticism. He can really.
Anytime you got to pick up athleticism, it's bad.
You're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Bennett's one of those sort of guys where I could see why teams get intrigued by him because there's an inherent cockiness in basically every organization where if you give them a raw set of tools, they can turn it into an NBA player. It was especially prevalent back in the 2000s when anybody who was 7 feet tall in an organization believed they could turn into a real NBA center. But Bennett's one of those sorts of guys where you can sort of see how a coach would take a look at him and say, I can figure this out. And especially when he has summers like he had this year where there were some of his skills that actually kind of translated. The problem with Bennett is that the skills only really translate as a center against small lineups. And against centers in small lineups that aren't elite NBA caliber.
So basically what? Like Brooklyn? Okay, that's a pretty small, populace there.
Which is exactly why I think Powell is the easy choice for who would play first between them. Bennett's a flyer. Scratching the idea of him being a number one pick and just imagining that he's a guy who exists in the NBA. He's a guy that teams are going to try to turn into an NBA player. Whereas I think Powell is an NBA player. It's the reason he's not getting sent down to the D League because that's a guy they actually want to have available to them game to game because they believe he could be of use in any game, any night if the matchup or the situation calls for it.
Okay, so Tim, another question here for you. You got to buy one jersey and you got to wear it all day, all week.
Okay.
Is it going to be Anthony Bennett or Terrence Ross?
Oh, Anthony Bennett. That's
really?
Easy. I never wear a Terrence Ross jersey. At least I can, claim Canada.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's take a break, man. It's been going for 40 minutes plus, and we'll come back and look at the schedule.
Get the golden touch to make them pay. Get Goldfinger today.
All right, welcome back to part 2 of the Rapcast. Tim Chisholm joins the podcast today. He's been kind enough to tell us how much he loves Terrence Ross. He put a whole article like defending him or something. What was the point of that article, Tim?
It wasn't to defend Ross because you can't, but it was for me just a case of trying to. I have a thing when I write that I enjoy at least trying to see if I can examine why a GM would make a move that on paper or at face value doesn't make a lot of rational sense, because especially with GMs like Masai Ujiri, you know he's smart. You know that he has a sense of what's going on. You know he has a sense of his own roster. I mean, this is not a David Kahn situation. So why would he? Why would he sign Terrence Ross to an $11 million a year deal? And for me, it's definitely not to reward his play. And it's definitely, I don't think, to presume that he's going to all of a sudden get it, so much as this is a guy that he feels that he could move on an $11 million contract, that's a deal that he knows that other GMs would, at the end of the day, take on in a trade. I may not be right, but there's no other defensible reason that I can see for why you would throw that much money at a guy that's that unproven. He had a number in his head. Terrence Ross was willing to come in at or under it, and so he inked the deal.
There's going to be some weird salary distribution going on for the next couple of years, because you're going to have Corey Joseph at 7 and Terrence Ross at 11, and that's got to be an uncomfortable situation. And then you're also going to have DeMar DeRozan possibly at like 24, 25, and Kyle Lowry at 12.
I'm so curious to see how the next couple of years work out in terms of the money thing, because it's a real issue in the locker room. Guys are very aware of what other guys are making. I mean, you even remember how Carmelo Anthony reacted to Jeremy Lin's deal in Houston. I mean, there's a undeniable competitive factor involved with salaries, and you have to wonder if players can look at the situation and say, well, look, it's a weird year. It's a weird couple of years because of the salary jumps and stuff. Or if it actually does create a certain amount of disharmony in locker rooms. There's going to be some guys where it does. I don't know if the Toronto players are like that. I don't think they are, but there's no basis for comparison. You have no idea how players are going to react to this unprecedented jump in the salary cap. So I'm just more curious than anything about how that's going to play out.
Do you remember way back when the Raptors had Yogi Stewart and Glenn Grunwald signed him to that extension? I think it was $5 million a year or something, maybe even less.
It's about $4 million a year, but yeah, I remember.
And it was considered a big contract at the time, and maybe he was even one of the top paid Raptors. And I remember opposing players, Yogi Stewart sitting on the bench, and they hit a jumper, and they turn around not to the defender or they turn around to Yogi Stewart and start talking trash at him because he's sitting on the bench making all that money. I think we're past those days, though.
Oh, God, I hope so. But that goes to the example of these teams that thought they could turn any 7-footer into an NBA player.
Let's look ahead to the schedule just briefly. Some interesting games this week. The Lakers are here on Monday night, 7:30 p.m. Kobe comes to town for one final time. Tickets, I see, are starting at $141 for this one. This is a team that is essentially basically a lottery team, and they're playing horrible basketball. I think they've won once in their last 10 outings. Kobe blessed us with a 4 for 17 performance from 3 the other day. A lot of bad things. Are you enjoying this decline of Kobe? How are you viewing this? Is it a bit of a pleasure seeing him down, or do you care? Do you feel sad for him? What's your thoughts here?
I mean, in the grand scheme, I don't care. I mean, I've been in NBA, that universe for long enough that, I watched Hakeem and Ewing and all those ends come, and they were just as ugly, and they were just
they though? Were they this ugly? I feel this ugliness has a higher platform for the world to see, whereas the other ones kind of didn't. Even when Jordan came back with the Wizards, you knew he was there to help the franchise, not necessarily the team on the court. Hakeem with the Raptors was injured, but at least he had a couple of game winners. He didn't prolong his death by doing what Kobe's doing.
That's interesting. No, and you know what? It's true. I mean, a lot of those guys ended up out of the league because they were so injured they really couldn't play, and whereas Kobe is playing a lot of minutes. So that's true. I mean, he definitely has a larger stage for it, but it's the kind of thing that's painful a bit now, but in the grand scheme, people really kind of won't remember. It's just, we're right in the thick of it. I take no pleasure in it. I'm not the be all and end all of a Kobe guy, but I very much remember there being a time in the history of the NBA where I would be more inclined to argue that he was one of, if not the best players in the league playing at the time, when it was a lot of people sort of still harping on his shot selection and his percentages and that sort of stuff. But he's not doing himself any favors. That's one of those sorts of things where, if anything, if there's any possible lasting repercussion of this, it's him doing damage to the notion of his inherent sort of unselfishness in terms of wanting to do what was best to help the team win. I mean, there's no way you can argue that right now, and that it's his worst characteristics coming out on full display, and that people could use it to argue down the road that, well, you want to see what undiluted Kobe was with no skill. That's what it was. So I don't know. There's that, but it'll be a couple more months. And then
where is he? Let's not talk about all-time greatest, because that's always a debate. But all-time best shooting guards, where do you rank him?
2 or 3. I mean, obviously Jordan is his own stratosphere with that, but I guess it's somewhere in that, like, between him and Jerry West. He's got way more titles than Jerry West, so he probably gets a notch ahead of him in that capacity. But I mean, like, if you said that he's the next best after Jordan, I don't know that you have a huge argument to make against it. So yeah, I mean, 5 titles in different generations of teams, the insane scoring totals. He for a few years he bent the league to his will with the way he could play, and you can't say that of many players.
And much like Jordan, I think what's similar about Kobe is that his second string of titles was always more impressive than the first one, because it happened at when he was a little older. He maybe didn't have the as great a team as the previous one. Because I still actually think the Bulls' '93 team is one of the best ever. So it's impressive that he kind of had to like reinvent himself midway through his career, where he couldn't rely on his athleticism so much like Jordan did, and he developed that fadeaway. I think overall he was still more forceful athletically than Jordan, like, if that makes any sense. He was always throwing down impressive dunks even later in his career, and Jordan kind of almost exclusively pegged that back a little bit and relied on his jumper. So I see parallels in Jordan and Kobe's game and how they won their second titles, different teams, different genres, as you say, but also they reinvented themselves, which was really impressive.
And it's actually funny if you want to think about how closely Kobe models his game after Jordan, because he doesn't have this version of Jordan to compare himself to in terms of how do you go to that last, even Jordan with the Wizards was like a real NBA player. Yeah. Kobe at this point is like basically cannot play that level of basketball anymore. And there was no comparison for him. And so his best thinking is, okay, well, I'll still shoot 30 times a game because that's probably what I should do. There's no blueprint for him. And the one he's making is not working. Yeah,
they're essentially tanking, but tanking like in plain sight. Here we go. This is Kobe for you. By the way, we're also tanking at the same time. Let's see what Ben Simmons can give us.
Yeah. Oh, they should be so lucky.
And with the NBA conspiracy and all that, I would not put it past the NBA for the Lakers to somehow get the number 1 pick.
We shall see. We shall see.
So I'm not even going to ask you what the prediction here is, because it's implied these days. So after that, on Wednesday, it's the Spurs. LaMarcus Aldridge was the big free agent signing. The Spurs are the Spurs. He himself hasn't played terribly well, but that's sort of expected of a marquee signing that signs with the Spurs, because they're all about the system, and they value the system over the individual. So it's kind of expected, at least for me, that Aldridge's numbers are a bit down.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, his game was so not compatible with the way that the Spurs wanted to play, and credit to him to not wanting the Spurs to bend to his will. He's trying to figure it out, and he knows that the regular season is basically a warm up for the playoffs for them, and so they're figuring it out.
Yeah, they're 17-4, and if it weren't for the Warriors, we'd be talking about the Spurs a whole lot. But unfortunately, they've been kind of eclipsed completely by what's going on with the Warriors.
I feel like that's been the history of Tim Duncan's Spurs, is that they've always been like quietly excellent, but there's been some weird aberration that's just sat right above them that is more interesting for people to talk about. It's hilarious how long that's been going on for.
So not much to talk about there. I mean, I guess we could, but I'd prefer to just skip the conversation and wait for the game. And after that, it's Fear the Deer. Milwaukee comes in. Oh, give me a prediction for the Spurs. Sorry.
I think the Spurs probably win it, but I think it'll be competitive because they tend to be against the better teams.
Yeah. Kawhi Leonard on DeMar DeRozan. Looking forward to that.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Milwaukee then comes to town on Friday. This is all part of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's a 6-game homestand for the Raptors, which they're currently 1-2 on. Actually, yeah. What are they here?
No, on the homestand they're 0-2.
They're 0-2. Yeah. Oh crap.
Yeah.
So they're 0-2 with 4 more games to go. Milwaukee, Fear the Deer. Where were you when the Bucks signed Greg Monroe and Grievous Vasquez and the trade? What did you think of those 2 moves by the Bucks?
They were fine. Like the Monroe one was almost more impressive as the rebuttal of the notion that New York or LA can just get whoever they want against a small market team. You're seeing the struggles they're having integrating him into what they're doing, though. I mean, this is a team that wants to be quick and athletic and defensive oriented, and he's none of those things.
Yeah.
And you do want options. You do want to have other ways you can play, as the Raptors are proving in the reverse. But it's a weird fit, and they're struggling. They keep sort of massaging their starting lineup, and they're working Jabari Parker back into it. But it's a move that I think is more impressive on a looking for a headline way than it has turned out to be on the basketball court. Vasquez is fine. Vasquez is a good backup point guard. I think the Raptors are happy with that trade. I think the Bucks are probably happy with that trade. So everyone's happy.
I thought both those 2 moves, the Monroe and the Vasquez one, were very anti 2014-15 Bucks. They weakened areas which were their strengths, which is aggressiveness, athleticism, defense, ball pressure. Both those signings, and they both play significant minutes, went away from that. They became a worse defensive team by getting those 2 guys in. That's why when the preseason hype around Milwaukee was there, I just was like, I don't see where this is coming from.
Yeah, I'm with you. The hype got a little bit out of control, and I think that for some reason people were acting like the Bucks were the Jazz of the East, and that the Monroe signing especially. And I mean, I say this like if you have the opportunity to sign Greg Monroe and you're Milwaukee, you do it and you kind of figure it out. But it does mean a significant change from the way in which you had been playing, and I don't know that they had fully acknowledged that prior to the season. The Vasquez one, I think. The problem with that one, to me, almost has more to do with the fact that they had traded Brandon Knight the year before, which is still perplexing to me. But that's sort of the reason why now you've got so many minutes to Vasquez, because Michael Carter-Williams is very whatever.
Hey, just related to Drummond's, Monroe's former team, Andre Drummond, I can't watch Pistons basketball. Like, I was watching them against the Rockets the other day. And I had to change the channel because Andre Drummond, every time I see him, it just makes me sad. Like it's one of those. It hurts worse than Iggy versus Joey Graham or even Hoffa over whoever the hell. It doesn't matter. Drummond is like a living example of what can happen if you don't do your homework on draft night. And man, it's difficult to watch Pistons basketball because the guy's playing really well, and every time we just touch them, I'm like, that's the guy we need. So.
The only reason why the Iggy one is still worse for me than that one is because Colangelo was so all in on Valanciunas as his center that, and there was the red flag of does Drummond have the mental intensity to play NBA basketball?
Yeah, and Ross did. He was screaming mental intensity on draft day.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of those moves that goes down. I mean, for a guy that typically drafts pretty well, that's going to go down as Colangelo's maybe his worst miss as a drafter. But the Iggy one was only because the Raptors still needed a small forward, and they went for Villanueva and Joey Graham. So. But yeah, the Drummond one.
Iggy was actually Hoffa.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Then the Joey Graham thing was against Danny Granger.
Oh, that's right. Oh, fond memories.
Yeah. So that's that. So if you, listener, if you see the Philadelphia 76ers, give them a hug. They need one.
Unless it's Chile Okafor, because you might get punched.
There's a couple of videos loading out there, not of his wife, but like, the tunnel cam in Philadelphia where the players exit. And every time the Sixers exit the court, they go through that tunnel, and you just see them so dejected. They're like leaning against the wall, rolling off of it. You can just tell that they're having a really tough time. And at 1-20, they're facing San Antonio, which is going to be a loss. Then they're facing Brooklyn, which is maybe a win, even though it's in Brooklyn. And then they got Detroit, Toronto, Chicago, Atlanta, New York's been playing well, Cleveland, Memphis, and then they face Milwaukee on December 23rd. They got a tough road ahead for them.
And you can understand why you have so many agents screaming bloody murder at the 76ers too, because you now have every player on that team is screaming at his agent to get him out of Philadelphia. Like, why would it must be the most miserable way to introduce yourself into the NBA than have to sit there on a team that has no interest in winning. They're not going to do anything for you as a player to help you win basketball games. And yet they're going to throw you out there every night to embarrass yourself for 48 minutes. I can't imagine what it's like to play for that team.
And they are getting better because I don't ask me why, but just since I got ball streams, just check out a lot of NBA. They are getting better actually. Like against Denver, they were up 8 in the fourth quarter before they lost, and even some games before that they were in it. And they've had fourth quarter leads where they've kind of blown. It's totally a team that just doesn't know how to win. It doesn't even matter if they're in the game late. You just know that they haven't had that experience of seeing it all the way through, and that they will screw up at some point. Whether it be Isaiah Caden taking a bad shot or Nels Knowles blowing a defensive coverage, all these things kind of come together, and the worst possible outcome in the fourth quarter will happen for them just because the stars are aligned that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the only thing that they've really trained for is the worst case, because that's the only thing they do repetitively. I mean, there's no veterans on that team to fix it. So they're just going to keep making the same mistakes because that's all they know how to do.
Got to throw you another question here, man. Mississauga native Nick Stauskas is like everybody else on Philadelphia. He's pretty much available. Any interest in him now that we're doing the whole Canadian thing?
Sure. I mean, you can always use shooters in theory if he were shooting better. But it's one of those sorts of guys that intrigues. But I don't know that he's a guy that if he came to Toronto, he would really get any minutes.
Yeah, he's in Mississauga probably. He'll go back to Mississauga.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Homecoming.
Yeah. So I think that kind of wraps it up. What was your prediction for? Did we do a Milwaukee prediction? What's your prediction for Milwaukee?
Well, they knocked him out by 20 earlier in the year, so let's give him a win by 10. Let's cut it in half.
So Philly's a win, so it's a 3-1 week. I think we concur with the loss coming to the Spurs.
Yep.
But then again, we've been quite off this year, so it doesn't really matter. Well, Tim, thanks for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. What do you got? How's Shakespeare in Play coming along?
Good.
Why don't you tell the listener about that?
Sure. In a random tangent, one of the reasons I left TSN a few years ago is I ended up doing. I have a theater background in addition to a sports broadcasting background, and so I ended up developing an app with filming Shakespeare's plays, putting it with the text for students in high school who are learning it for the first time, and we've had a great response from teachers. So it's always just trying to get it into as many schools as we can, and so that's sort of my 9 to 5 while. I sit there every 5 to 12 and watch NBA basketball.
Yeah, cool. All right, man. Next time.
Absolutely.